Over the last several thousand years, there are several ideas that has significantly shaped our perspective, our shared memory, and of course our impact on the society. One such very influential idea is the notion of monotheism, the belief in a single deity. Now, it might sound very intuitive that if there is a God, there is only one God. This notion has brought along with it a host of other significant implications. So, today, we will try to explore some of these not so obvious implications or consequences of this notion. Divisive doctrines and discrimination, scapegoating, and us versus them. The concept of a chosen people by a single deity can create a very dangerous us versus them mentality. It creates a breeding ground for scapegoating and discrimination against anyone deemed an outsider. This approach overlooks the power of individual responsibility. See, people make choices and these choices have consequences. Humanity thrives on progress. And where does this progress comes from? It comes from trial and error, making mistake and learning out of those mistakes. This us versus them mentality stifles this vital process by claiming inherent superiority for one group and at the same time rejecting the potential for growth in all other groups. Religious dogmatism and intolerance, sources of violence and conflict. Many historical and contemporary conflicts have been fueled by the dogmatic nature of certain monotheistic beliefs. The conviction of possessing one absolute faith can justify wars, persecution, and violence against anyone with a differing belief. The belief in a single, infallible deity with an absolute truth can foster intolerance towards other faiths, often deeming them as false or misguided. These intolerance can lead to significant social division and conflict. Monotheistic dogmatism not only breed conflict and persecution, but it can also stifle intellectual and cultural development. The unwavering belief of a single infallible deity with one absolute truth often discourages questioning and dissenting views. This suppression of an alternative perspective can hinder cultural progress and creativity, often leading to a more rigid and less dynamic society. Monotheism and the allure of authoritarianism. Monotheistic religions are a fertile ground for creating authoritarian structures. Founders of these so called religions often proclaim themselves as the prophets or messengers of God, which can limit individual freedoms and, in most cases, lead to brutal dictatorships. These systems often link morality solely to the divinely dictated laws by these so called prophets. And when morality is linked to these so called divine inspirations, it can discourage questioning of these so called religious doctrines and social norms as prescribed by these so called prophets. Needless to say, such authoritarian control limit individual and cultural development. As a matter of fact, the societies that are ruled by a single or a handful of dictators, people are often controlled by the fear of divine punishment as well as the promise of heavenly rewards for their blind submission. And this blind submission can lead individuals to sacrifice their lives or even worse, destroy other civilizations under the guise of divine duties as prescribed by these so called prophets. See, when people are brainwashed into believing that they are doing God's work, they can be used or manipulated into committing sheer atrocities genocide, rape, slaughter, slavery, as we have seen in the history. This is how the inhuman and barbaric dictators often expand their territory at the expense of innocent lives, obliterating existing cultures, further entrenching their authoritarian grip. Monotheism's shadow and the cultural erasure. The collective and expansionist message of some of these monotheistic religions can overshadow and even eradicate local traditions and cultures. The indigenous practices and worldviews that are incompatible can be violently suppressed. History bear witness. Countless tribes across the Middle East, Africa, and the Indian subcontinent have lost their identity through violent religious persecution and forced conversion. This has led to the slaughter of hundreds of millions of people over the last several thousand years across many continents in almost every part of the world. This imposition of monotheistic beliefs through violence and coercion has led to significant cultural homogenization, erasing diverse traditions and cultures in favor of a singular religious perspective. Exclusivity, tribalism, and barbarism. Monotheism can be exclusive, often asserting that only followers of a specific faith can obtain salvation or other divine favors, such as the promise of 72 virgins for those who kill and are killed, i.e., murdered, in the name of their faith. This dangerous and psychologically manipulative idea of martyrdom is evident in the daily occurrence of terrorism as well as suicide bombing. Such exclusivity fosters division and conflict as it creates us versus them mentality, undermining social cohesion and, in fact, promoting violence. Challenges in explaining evil. Monotheistic religions face significant challenges in explaining the origin of evil in a world that is supposedly created by a single, all powerful, all good God. The notion of sufferings and injustices raise troubling questions. If God is truly omnipotent and benevolent, why does evil exist? While the concept of cause and effect suggests that people suffer because of their own decisions and actions, monotheistic religions fail to accommodate this perspective fully. In addition, monotheistic religions often tend to overlook the deeper psychological relationship that exists between suffering and the notion of identity. For instance, a person feels more distressed if their own image is being burned as opposed to the image that is being burned belongs to a stranger. This illustrates how identity with something, personal identification with something, can cause misery to someone. Monotheistic religions ignore this perspective, asserting their supremacy and inherent goodness. It cannot grasp the idea that our own limited identification, the idea of self, can be sources of suffering. Instead of advocating to give up this limited identification of self, it promotes more of the selfishness by promising heavenly rewards for its believers, its followers. Moreover, monotheism often tend to attribute evil to external sources, the notion of us and them, thus dismissing the possibility that what is considered evil can evolve over time through better decisions and changing circumstances. This approach totally neglects the complexities of moral development and the potential for transformation. Okay, thus reinforcing a simplistic and rather a naive and static view of good and evil. Monotheistic beliefs fail to define morality. Monotheistic religions often struggle to provide a clear and objective basis for morality. True test of morality lies in self abnegation, renunciation of the self or self interest. Any action taken by an individual cannot be justified as moral if they serve self interest, if these actions are taken out of selfish motives. While monotheism may dictate action, often the underlying justification is self serving. True morality, arguably, should transcend personal gain. Take, for instance, the concept of martyrdom. In some monotheistic tradition, martyrdom encourages violence in exchange for heavenly reward. The promise of 72 virgins in paradise incentivizes killing and dying, blurring the line between barbarity and righteousness. The focus on external reward undermines the intrinsic value of moral action. Furthermore, framing violence as divinely sanctioned, as seen in historical as well as contemporary atrocities, hinders genuine moral development. See, morality shouldn't rely on divine diktats, but on empathy and a sense of right and wrong. In such cases, monotheism risks perpetuating these cycles of violence by justifying actions that could otherwise be considered immoral and outright savagely and brutal. Instead of making moral progress, promising a better society, it can turn sane and just individuals into a bunch of sadistic, bloodthirsty barbarians destroying the society. So, there you have it, seven fatal flaws of monotheism. And now, I'm looking forward to see what you have to say in defense of this notion, especially if you are a follower of one of these monotheistic religions. So please do make an effort to enlighten me by outlining how this notion can be an ideal solution for our society by creating an environment that is conducive for cultural development, that is conducive for creating a society that is diverse and inclusive. So, thank you for listening, and I will catch up with you on the next one. Bye for now.